podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome once again to your daily How Are the podcast. And it only seems 2 minutes ago since we were talking to our guest today ahead of our trip to St James's Park to take on the visitors back in March. But a lot has happened since then, of course, so we thought we'd invite him back on to catch up on all the events since then and to sum up Sunderland's season and maybe help put it into perspective from a historical point of view while we're at it. But before we can introduce today's guest, I need to introduce Gavin Henderson, who, like the rest of us, simply can't get enough of talking about Sunderland at the moment. Hello, Gav.
Yeah, mate, it's still not really sunk in that we've managed to do what we've done, and I'm gonna milk it dry over the summer. Although with the World Cup coming up, I am starting to think a little bit more about it. Weirdly, I'm not bothered about England too much, but I'm more bothered about like what our players are up to. I mean, I've mapped them all out on our little schedule, so I know what games are going on and who's going to be playing when and stuff around podcasts and things. So. Yeah, still kind of in that Sunderland bubble, even though the season's over with.
Yeah, it is brilliant in the chats lately, building up to the World Cup. Absolutely zero mentions of England or England squad or anything like that. It's all about Sunderland players and how they're building up to the World Cup. But I'm sure we'll touch on the World Cup before we finish up. But as I said, we do have a special guest, and he's one of the top journalists who have covered North East football over the last few decades. And to top it off, he's a very good friend of the podcast because if we gave out hat-trick balls for appearances on How Are the podcast, he'd be picking up his third signed match ball today. We love hearing from him, and we're very glad to have Ian Murtagh with us. Hello, Ian.
Hello, happy close season.
Yes. And I said that match ball will be in the post here, Ian. But how's it going?
Everything's going well. I know there's an awful lot of people who say, "Oh, I hate the summer. Bring on the next season." But I love all my sport. This weekend, we've got the French Open finals in tennis. We've got the Test match in cricket, and the derby. So bring it on for me. I love football, but there's plenty of other sports that keep me entertained as well.
Yeah, but you're saying you're watching the England-New Zealand Test as a neutral, Ian?
Do you know what? I've followed the West Indies since I was a kid. My heroes were Malcolm Marshall, Gordon Greenwich, and it's a great sad demise to see the collapse of the West Indies cricket. We spent a holiday last year in Jamaica, and I struggled to find Jamaicans who wanted to talk cricket. It's all basketball and football or soccer over there
Really?
these days.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very sad.
No, that's a surprise. But I was going to kick us off, Ian, just by asking you if you finished celebrating Celtic's title win yet.
Well, I've been to hundreds, thousands of matches during my career, and I can say this in all honesty: that the atmosphere at Celtic Park against Hearts, and 8 days later, Stadium of Light, Sunderland v Chelsea, have got to be in my top 10, if not my top 5. Sensational, and that's saying something. Unbelievable noise at both grounds.
Yeah, it's funny, Ian. I was quickly listening back to our last pod back in March, and we did mention Martin O'Neill, but I'll tell you what, the job he did there, I mean, it was incredible, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no one gave Celtic a chance, and I mean, as you pointed out, and as my friends keep pointing out, everyone wanted Hearts to win, and I said, well, personally, I want the underdog to win, because if Celtic were the underdog in that 3-horse race.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, Gav, you were talking about Sunderland players in the World Cup, but I enjoyed watching Martin O'Neill be back in the game. And when we talked to him, of course, when we had him on the pod, and I was saying it'd be great to see him back in the game and all this sort of stuff. And I bet he didn't guess it was going to be at Celtic.
Well, I think if there was one club that could have coaxed them back out, it probably was Celtic, wasn't it? Yeah, I'm not like a big follower of Celtic, but I'm always happy to see Martin O'Neill do well. And it was actually because and this might have escaped people, but he left them midway through the season, didn't he? And they replaced him and then brought him back again. And when he left the first time around, he got a big send off where the fans serenaded him, and he spoke on the pitch and said, "You need to get behind the next manager." And I felt quite a lot of, I was like, "Go on, Martin!" Like, I felt good for him because he'd never managed for a long time and then came back in, and it obviously had quite an effect to the point the fans were showering with love. But yeah, it was exciting, wasn't it? Seeing it go right the way down to the last couple of days. I think for the good of the game, you need competitive leagues. It doesn't matter what country it's in. So if Hearts are in the mix now, then great. But I think they've lost a few players already, haven't they? So we'll see how that goes. But it's just nice. It was nice to see the Scottish League go right to the death. I mean, yeah, good to see.
Yeah, I think about 10 seconds after the final whistle, Shankland had already gone, hadn't he, basically? But anyway, moving back onto Sunderland and this season. Of course, we'll come on to Sunderland in detail, Ian, but just generally, how have you enjoyed having Sunderland and Newcastle back in the top flight, and just how have you enjoyed covering this season?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'll admit I'm not covering as many games as I was. I am sort of winding down. But, from the press box or even watching on television, absolutely magnificent at Sunderland. I think I mentioned it before, the feel-good fans factor at the stadium, like in Sunderland in general, it's immeasurable. Everyone's got a smile on their face. Everybody. They're not just looking forward to the 90 minutes of the match. They're looking forward to match day, the experience. The city is thriving. The walk to the stadium fills people with immense pride, and invariably the football leaves them with a smile on their face after 90 minutes.
Yeah, must give you a couple of flashbacks seeing that "Welcome to Sunderland" sign now on the stadium. Ian.
It's lovely to see, isn't it? I mean, I do like all these little extras. Now, I hope that with the departure of David Bruce, they don't stop because we all know he was instrumental in a lot of these improvements, and long may they continue even without him there.
Yeah. Well, Gav, I was just going to say, just on this season with Sunderland and Newcastle, obviously back in the top flight, and it's been a while. I think it was 2016, 17 or something like that the last time we were there, Gav. But we almost had Borough in there as well, Gav, for the first time for a while.
Yeah, they did the best to chuck it, didn't they?
I
I mean, they will be a really good quiz question in years to come. Won't they? The only team who lost in the semi and the final, Middlesbrough. But yeah, would I wanted Borough in there? I don't think I did want Middlesbrough back. We've already got Coventry to deal with. I don't want another chirpy little club coming up who doesn't like us. I much prefer Hull being in the Premier League. But yeah, do you know what it is though? I think when you look at the way that Steve Gibson has ran Middlesbrough for the last 40 odd years now, it's a crying shame really that they aren't in the Premier League, because he's got to be one of the best chairmen in football, who's backed these managers, who's spent money. You can't ask much more from an owner, and they've underachieved really. Let's be honest. I mean, this season in particular, you couldn't have given them a better chance of getting promoted, and they blew it.
Yeah. It'll be and actually, well, there'll be a quiz question like us, who went up and lost a playoff final, and they'll have their quiz question about the playoffs. But I just want to go back to the last time we talked to you, Ian, because it was just before that derby back in March. It was in that build-up, and we talked to you about that game, and you were saying that you hoped that the game at St James would be a good advert for the derby in general, and you were hoping to see two committed sides on the pitch and have no trouble off it. I mean, you were kind of in two minds whether you were looking forward to it or not. Did you end up enjoying it?
Yes, I did. I must admit, and I think if you'd read between the lines of what I was saying, what was it, about 72 hours before the derby, I didn't think Sunderland would win. I thought they might get a draw, but I thought a home win was the most obvious result. When the team sheets came, I couldn't for the life of me see Sunderland getting anything out of the game. And then, of course, with 10 minutes gone, it seemed like mission impossible. Sunderland were terrific. I remember at half time, the discussion in the press room, was all about how Robbie was dominating the Newcastle centre halves, and that there was the seeds of a Sunderland comeback were there, even at 1-0 down. And so it proved, I mean, that, there was only one winner. And while Robbie's late goal was dramatic, it was, well, it wasn't exactly surprising. Such was Sunderland's second half dominance.
Yeah. I just wanted to call you out actually on some of the things you said, Ian, because
Yeah.
you actually called, well, no, in a good way, in a positive way, because you actually, when I listened back, you called it when I listened back to it. You said that Sunderland would concede, but you also said that Newcastle had a tendency this season to lose momentum after scoring. And actually, that's exactly what happened, because I felt less worried about Newcastle going forward after they scored than before 09's slip-up.
Yeah, I don't think Eddie Howe managed to solve that problem. I mean, we all know while Sunderland were the side who gained the most points from losing positions, Newcastle threw away more points from winning positions. So, it was hardly rocket science, but it was very strange. In the past few seasons, Newcastle have uh, gained so much momentum from scoring goals, but something has happened to them. While Sunderland, the collective belief within that side and the mentality is just so strong. Not for 1 minute did they feel sorry for themselves. Did they think it was a lost cause? And we can pick out numerous games this season where that's been the case.
Yeah. Just going back to that game, Gav, very quickly, because of course there's always loads of emotion around a derby game. But do you think at times Sunderland's performance that day gets a bit lost? Because as Ian said, even at half time, people were talking in the press box of seeing how well Sunderland were playing. And the Newcastle goal came from part of our game plan, which was to take goal kicks and then to miss the midfield out. And we stuck with it. And it just showed the confidence, because I think it's easy to forget a performance in a game like that when you win a massive game and just how well we played.
Well, the mentality going into it will have been in the full knowledge that the pressure was on Newcastle. I remember talking about that at the time. Obviously Sunderland had won the first game back in Newcastle, so stadium full of expectant fans thinking, right, come on then, you were terrible the last time out. Let's see what you've got in this one. And I just don't think Newcastle, other than for about 15 minutes, with a better team. I think Sunderland kind of, as the game went on, got better and better, and were in more control of what was going on. And then they kind of just did what they do all the time, Sunderland. It didn't matter that it was Newcastle. You've seen it so many times this season where we've gone behind and we've picked up points. The best in the league statistically for doing that. It doesn't seem to matter who we play. That is generally the attitude. Whereas I got the sense from Eddie Howe, he was panicking a bit. His subs were a bit strange, and he was making like-for-like changes, which since then I've spoken to my mates who are Newcastle fans, and apparently that is a big trait of his, that he will just, take a left winger off for a left winger. He'll take a striker off for a striker. He won't really change the system a great deal. Whereas with us, with the Briss, with the players on the pitch, you felt we were in full control. And yeah, it probably, maybe with the emotion of it all, maybe from our perspective, we don't focus on performance so much. It was more just about the moment, the way we won the game, the way we celebrated afterwards. But it was a really, really good derby performance. There's been probably in my life, what I can remember, 2 occasions where we've gone there and the game plan has been the success of it all for us. It was this one and the 3-0 under Poirier, where we played in the yellow kit and just completely played them off the park. That's the 2 occasions I can think of where it was almost like the mentality of our players wasn't that this is a derby. It was kind of tracked like any other game, and we were very clear-headed in what we were doing.
Talking about the celebrations, as if anyone can remember that, Gav, how we celebrated the game. But Ian, again, looking back at that game, I actually think it was a real pivotal game in how everything turned out in the end, because when we were talking about it, again, the feelings that you had that you described earlier on, Sunderland had won 1 in 6 going into the game and had just been knocked out the cup by Port Vale. And Newcastle were hitting a bit of form and preparing to play Barcelona. And actually, it ended up, being a huge game in hindsight where, because again, looking at the league table at the time, Newcastle were 2 places above, 2 points better off. And it ended up a huge pivotal game in the season.
Oh, absolutely. It it gave Sunderland's campaign a rebirth, didn't it? And Europe wasn't talked about particularly beforehand. It wasn't talked about that much afterwards, but what was being talked about is, yes, Sunderland can finish above Newcastle, and that was just gave fresh impetus to the whole season, didn't it? And I would say, the feel good factor, which has been there from the moment that Dan Ballard headed against Coventry last season. It's been there ever since. It could have dissipated with the Derby defeat, but of course, it's still there now.
Yeah, just again, going back to that again, some of the comments before the game. Again, we talked to them in the build-up, and I'm just looking at it from the context of how we saw the rest of the season playing out, not just on that day, but during that week. Eddie Howe very publicly said Barcelona is the biggest game of the season, with the derby coming up. That led into the run-in, that led into potentially qualifying for Europe or not. Do you think he got his priorities all wrong?
No, I don't. I mean, he said Barcelona was the biggest game before the Barcelona game. He which is only fair. In the same way that Regis de Vries will always say the next game is the biggest game. So I didn't read anything too much into that, to be honest. I think it was just a case of a manager being very focused on what was immediately ahead of him.
Yeah. Well, just carrying on, Ian, in terms of that run-in, because including that Newcastle game, as I said, we won only just once in the 6 games before that. But then, including the Newcastle game, we won 4 of the last 8. We were only beaten twice in the last 8. I mean, that's an impressive run-in from a newly promoted side who's hit a wobble of only winning 1 in 6.
Of course it is. And at the time, the narrative was, well, Sunderland's home form has kept them up. But if you look at Sunderland's away form in the last third of the season, well, it was not much short of outstanding, was it? Winning at Leeds, winning at Newcastle, winning at Everton as well. Now, I remember at the beginning of the season, just thinking to myself, I don't know if I expressed it out loud, but thinking, Sunderland, they can stay up, but it will be a case of picking up 30 plus points at home. If they reach 10 to 12 points away, they'll have done very, very well. Well, was it about 20 points? I haven't exactly looked, but 5 wins, some good draws as well. So, that by any measurement is good away performances.
Yeah. I mean, Gav, looking back at it, it was impressive, wasn't it? After that bad run, that we ended up being able to pick it back up. It was we say a bad run. God, we've had a lot worse in the Premier League in some Premier League seasons down the years. Don't get us wrong, but to have that mental strength to come back when people are questioning you and all of that, and then you go on that run. I mean, that takes some mental strength to turn it around like that for the running.
And I think that's a lot to do with the leaders in the group, isn't it? Granit Xhaka, Nordi Mukiele, Enzo Lefebvre, Ronaldo. These are players who've got experience and have, in the most part, to be fair, haven't suffered. I think Granit Xhaka actually said when he signed, didn't he, that he wanted to suffer at some point in his career. He wanted to know what it was like to struggle, which he has yet to do.
Should have joined us in League One.
Yeah. But I think I'll just put it down to that. I think when your mentality is strong, you can overcome just about anything. Like I think in particular, you think of that Forest defeat. That, in terms of enthusiasm and morale, was crushing. Like, it was the worst I've ever seen. We just felt the bits on the pitch didn't turn up, and a lot of teams in that situation would have crumbled, and they wouldn't have picked up after that point. And there would have been infighting, and there would have been people calling out the manager and all these other things. And there wasn't. We kind of just drew a line under it and went, let's move on. And at various points under Lebris, that's happened. We've suffered bad results, and I think I talk about Granit Xhaka and Ronaldo and Mukiele and whoever else, but he is the one that kind of sets the tone for everybody else. And I say it all the time: he never gets too high, he never gets too low. When we get beat, his mentality, the way his aura, the way he presents himself, is exactly the same as if we've won. You sometimes get a little eyebrow raise out of him, and you sometimes get a little shrug of the shoulders. That's about as much emotion as you get out of Reggie Slibberies. So I think when he's cool all the time, it must resonate with the players, mustn't it? And I think he gives us a lot in that regard, and that's pretty much why we were able to overcome that bad run. And also, you think back to the back end of the championship season just before the playoffs, when everybody's going, Sunderland have blown it. Like, you can't go into a playoff run when having lost games and all that. He was so clear in what he was doing that it didn't really matter. And I think the proof's there, isn't it? That he's a very cool customer and knows what he's doing.
Well, look, before we get into trying to put everything into perspective in terms of what we achieved at the end of the season, I think it's time for a quick break. So we'll be back very soon.
This episode is brought to you by Starbucks.
That is fire.
Whoa,
That's good.
this might be the drink of the summer.
Okay, I like this one too. I'm rocking with it. Okay.
Try it for yourself. Starbucks Refreshers concentrates are coming home. Find them in the coffee aisle and make it yours.
And welcome back to How We're the Podcast. And we're just about to kind of get into Sunderland's achievement at the end of the season, Ian. And of course, again, going back to some of the comments that we talked about the last time you were on the pod, and again, going back to that run we were on, you'd actually said that potentially that the ship might have sailed on European qualification at that point. But it did show that there was a little bit of an assumption maybe in the media. And actually, I think there was a little bit of fear with Sunderland fans that we'd run out of steam a little bit. And it was probably fair at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't speak to any Sunderland fan who thought Europe was a possibility after the Forest defeat. In fact, when Sunderland failed to beat relegated Wolves, albeit reduced to 10 men for a long period, and then failed to make superiority count against Man United, nobody thought it even then. At half-time at Everton's new ground, the Hill Dickinson, no one would have thought it. But of course, because that day, if you remember, it wasn't just a fine away with the Sunderland at Everton. It was the combination of results elsewhere. And it was a eureka moment, wasn't it? Fans suddenly said, my goodness, Brighton have lost. Brentford, look what happens if we beat Sunderland, if this happens. And it was only then when this glorious possibility resurfaced.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that, isn't it, Gav? That, and I bet you if we listen back to some of our pods, I was going, oh, well, I think that's Europe over. We don't think we've got much hope there. But it is easy to forget that we went through those moments, and especially in that second, because the other thing that we also forget, I think, is how impressive the start to the season was, because we lost twice as many games in the second half of the season than we did in the first, Gav.
Yeah, and it was that momentum that we carried from the championship, and it just kept going, didn't it? We were worried about that before the start of the season. Like, will we be able to cope with the way football's played in the Premier League? And for 30 minutes against West Ham on the opening day, I felt like we were in for a long old season. But then we rode through it, and when you get promoted, you do have some momentum behind you. You've got all that belief, haven't you, from having won a lot of games. And it's probably worth noting that for the last 10 years now, we've won a lot of games of football. We haven't had a season where we've been battling relegation for a good 10 years. So the mentality in the club is that we win games, whether it's been in League One, whether it's been in the Championship or the Premier League. And if you don't get off to that good start, that's when the players are looking around and going, well, shit, what do we do now? We're not used to losing games. And maybe that's the situation that Burnley found themselves in, where they, after 10 games, probably only won 2, and one of them was against us. And then you start asking questions of yourselves. Where with us, we just kept churning out results, and we weren't we weren't trying to do what a lot of promoted teams try to do, which is play the same kind of football that blows away teams at lower levels. We actually played the same style of football we played in the Championship, but it wasn't a particularly attacking style of football. So, and I remember I'm sure you can, but I remember talking last season and saying the style we play now suits the Premier League probably, because we are going to be under the cosh for long periods. We are going to need to dig in. We are going to need to break with pace and things like that. And these are all things we've done through the season. Whereas other teams come up having with 100-odd points or whatever, and then they wonder why they can't translate that to Premier League football. I think that's possibly why we were able to then just go away to Nottingham Forest, away to Chelsea. Teams coming to the Stadium of Light and making it really difficult for them because we enjoy being an underdog and we enjoy sitting in and then counter-attacking and putting big tackles in around the pitch. It was basically just a continuation of what we'd done in the Championship, but with better players, and it worked.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. But Ian, let's get to that final day of the season because you've already touched on it. That atmosphere. I think we've exclusively had fans on since the actual last day of the season, so we've been trying to put it into perspective from our own experiences at the Stadium of Light, and obviously we go with our red and white tinted glasses on, Ian. But from a neutral, can you kind of describe what it was like on that last day of the season?
Yes, it felt historic because there would have only been, I would guess, less than 20% of the ground will have been watching Sunderland when they last qualified. A qualified few, i.e., were present at Wembley. In fact, I would say less than 10%. My immediate emotion, and this might sound strange, is it's about bloody time. I'll tell you what I mean by that. This is my 40th year covering North East football. And in all those 40 years, I have convinced myself that Newcastle and Sunderland are both top 10 clubs. They are among the top 10 clubs in this country. I remember in the late 80s, there wasn't a North East club in the top flight. But I've still always thought that. Now, I'm just going to go back in history a little bit. I remember when I was on the Journal in the mid-90s, and I did a piece with a lovely guy called Ernie about the last time that the league title was brought to the North East, Sunderland winning it in 1936. And I remember saying to him, so how do the Raish Carters and the Bobby Gurneys compare to today's figures, etc.? And he said, well, it was a good team, but he said, I remember my granddad complaining about that team, says, not as good as Tom Watson's team of all talent in the 1890s. So there again, you have different narratives. The journalist, Doug Wetherell, who's still alive in his mid-90s, I can remember talking to him about when Sunderland were relegated in 1951, ending the longest ever run in the First Division. And he said there was a shame on Wearside and County Durham and Northumberland, of course, at the time, because a lot of Sunderland fans were there. He said it felt a stain on your character because this was a team which never contemplated anything but First Division football. Now, since then, this horrible statistic of before this season, only 2 top 7 finishes in 50, 60 years. That is a disgrace for a team like Sunderland, as it is a disgrace that Sunderland haven't won a major domestic honour, since 1973. So, of course, I'm not going to say Sunderland are back where they belong, but they are where they belong, where they should be. I'm a great believer that there's a football hierarchy. You've got your top 3, Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal. Don't think many people would dispute that. And as I say, Sunderland have been punching below their weight for not just season after season, but decade after decade. Remember, they came out of World War II believing they could win the title again. That Bank of England team in the 50s was designed to make Sunderland title challenges again. Never materialised, and has never looked like materialising ever since. So while Sunderland, if you look at this season in isolation, of course have punched above the weight. Newly promoted team, qualifying for Europe, hasn't happened for a long time. Well, I think Wolves and Ipswich are the only ones this millennium. So, of course, what they've done is fantastic achievement. And what this rant I'm on now is in the slightest way to be undermining that achievement. What it is saying is, this is a great football club with a proud heritage. And where Sunderland are now is where they should have been all this time.
Yeah, Mr. Smith's got a lot to answer for in their 50s. But But Ian, just in terms of that day, as you said, you've covered Northeast football for 40 years. And, where does that rank in achievement for, let's say just covering Sunderland, of course, but where does this sort of day rank in terms of the whole day? We'll put the performance in there. We'll put the atmosphere in there. We'll put what the result was in terms of qualifying for the Europa League. Where does that rank?
Well, I know on your podcast, people have been talking about recency bias, but even allowing for that, it's up there at the top. A lot of fans would say the Everton game, the 3-0 Everton game when Kone scored the 2 goals, of course, that was a day when not only did Sunderland secure survival, but they relegated their bitter rivals. I can remember at Newcastle, back in the late 90s when Kenny Dalglish was manager, they secured second place, which got Champions League football at the time, on the same day that Sunderland were relegated. So, so for local fans, I guess, having pure joy for yourselves and pure despair for your rivals is, doubly intoxicating. But there's no doubt it was a sense, it's a sense of achievement. I remember at the beginning of the season sitting next to Jeff Brown, who you had on your podcast earlier, and incidentally, I echo all your comments about his outstanding Rolly Gregor documentary.
Absolutely fantastic, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I remember looking at him on the final whistle against West Ham. Because Jeff and I go back years. We worked together at the Journal. And I said, Jeff, you got tears in your eyes. And I was on the phone to him just the other day, congratulating him on the documentary. And he said he had that same feeling at the final whistle after Chelsea, because he didn't think, and he'd never told me this before, he didn't think he'd ever see Sunderland play top-flight football again. Now, because of where Sunderland have come from, there must be many, many fans who feared that was the case, when Sunderland were struggling to beat teams like Accrington, Stanley and Burton Albion. And, a day like this didn't just seem, it didn't seem years away. It felt light years away. It felt like mission impossible getting where they are now.
Yeah. Gav, I mean, Ian's absolutely right, but it does emphasise the point that, and again, absolutely right about that fear about not even playing in the Premier League anytime soon, never mind coming up to the Premier League and doing what we've done. And this is why I think at that final whistle against Sheffield United, Gav, we all had this fear we were going to get promoted and just get slapped about for a year and go back down. But to do what we've done, again, feels even bigger because of that fear we had, that we thought maybe the next decade could be in the Championship or even League One. And we've not only bounced up, but we're playing European football.
I think all Sunderland fans have this inner pessimism that they can't control because it's PTSD, really. We've suffered so much as fans from seeing the team just let us down continually. So to finally have a club and a team that actually wants to succeed and matches that ambition on the pitch with performances and signs players who other clubs look at and go, well, we wouldn't mind him in our team. All these things come together, and it's almost unbelievable that you're watching Sunderland. I don't go to the games now and look at that team and think that's the Sunderland I grew up with, because it's not. It's a totally new, fresh, different club. And that inner pessimism I was talking about, there's part of you sitting there going, oh God, someone will burst this with a pin eventually and it'll all come crashing down quickly. And because there are people who will be thinking like that, who will be thinking, surely this cannot be this good for that long. And Chris is waving because he's one of those people. But as you know, I'm not one of those people, actually. I'm quite optimistic. I don't know where it comes from. I think you've got to be, really. You've got to be. Yes. But hey, just live in the moment. I'm pretty sure we all are. We are all living in the moment. We're all dreaming about going to Europe and what the team might go on to do next. And, we are primed to achieve something tangible, like Ian touched on before about trophies and things. Well, in the last 5 years in the Premier League, there are clubs who I would say Sunderland are probably better than, or bigger than, or certainly we could match them going toe-to-toe. I mean, we beat Chelsea twice this year, who won trophies in the last 12 months. Crystal Palace, we've taken points off them, who've won 3 trophies in the last year or so. You know what I mean? So there's no reason why Sunderland can't. Villa going to a Europa League final and winning it. A lot of those Villa players who played in that final were part of Dean Smith's team at Aston Villa 5-6 years ago.
That's right.
And have stuck with the club and they've grown with the club. And now look at Villa, they're playing in the Champions League. They've just won a European trophy. Who knows what's next for them? So why not? Why shouldn't Sunderland think like that? Because you can't say we don't have a team and a manager and an off-field structure that doesn't match the ambition of a club that wants to win something.
Let's face it, Gareth, Sunderland, they're already destined for the best run in the League Cup for a few years because they've got to buy from the second round. Being in Europe.
Yeah. And I've said it once and I'll say it again. I call it the Adi Akinbaye effect because I was at Filbert Street that day. We all knew he was going to score. But anyway, just go again, this historical context, Ian, we've been covering ourselves, or at least I have a little bit. And it might be worth a pod on its own, who knows. But you covered those 2 seasons under Peter Reidy around 25 years ago or so when we finished 7th twice in a row. We got 58 points in the first of those and 57 in the second, and on both occasions missed out on European qualifications. We got 54 points this time around to qualify for what would have been the UEFA Cup back then. I mean, with the gap to the Premier League that exists now, was the season just gone maybe a bigger achievement, do you think?
Well, bearing in mind Sunderland, where they've come from, it's a bigger achievement, undoubtedly. I mean, it's very difficult to compare and contrast different campaigns 20, 25 years apart. I've got this vivid memory, and I think it was the second season, it was April time in the second 7th place season, when Sunderland were 2-0 up against Tottenham, and turning to Simon Bird, who was sitting next to me in the press box, and saying, would it be great if or when we go to Europe with Sunderland, because of course we've been quite regularly with Newcastle at the time, and Middlesbrough, of course, we had 2 great seasons with them in 2004-05, and at that time it looked as if Sunderland would qualify for Europe, but they turned a 2-0 lead into a 3-2 defeat that afternoon, and it never materialized. So, there were times that Europe was talked about more than, in fact, that second season after a 2-0 win at West Ham, I think it was in the January, and then they played about 10 days later Manchester United, and I remember one paper, it wasn't mine, but one paper saying, are Sunderland the only side who are going to challenge Manchester United for the title this season? I think there was about 8 or 9 points, but they behind, but Sunderland were in second place, I think, that January. So, what's happened this season isn't unprecedented in that sense. Where it is unprecedented is the fact, it's Sunderland's greatest league season in terms of European qualification has come in the same decade as their blackest period.
Yeah. Just incidentally, Ian, after that West Ham game, Reidy's side won 1 in 12 games after that. And we still managed to finish 7th. But just considering again that achievement qualifying for the Europa League, looking forward a little bit, Ian, how tough do you think it's going to be to maybe handle expectation levels after a season like that?
Difficult to say. All we can look at is the way that the club, i.e. the hierarchy, and Reidy's debris in terms of on the pitch have handled the promotion to the top flight and what's happened since. Everything that they've done suggests it will be handled professionally and correctly. What we don't know, of course, people talk about the Europa League campaign, and of course everyone talks about Mackham's in Milan and maybe Juventus, and wouldn't it be great for Kirill to go back to Marseille? But of course, there will be 1 or 2 unfashionable ties. Maybe Sunderland will play a Latvian side, for argument's sake, at home, or maybe they might have to travel to Azerbaijan or Lithuania. So, will they attract 40,000 plus crowds for those type of games? How will Sunderland fare if they're coming back from, Azerbaijan and then have to go to London the following Saturday? So, of course, there'll be difficulties. I did laugh a little bit when the bookies said Sunderland with 2 to 1 fourth favourites to go down. That's it's too simplistic. Football isn't about artificial intelligence, just so it's not about XG. There's a lot of imponderables, and there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and August. What I would suggest, and I'll put to you, I suspect Sunderland fans will be in a more positive frame of mind now about the months ahead, once the board have strengthened the squad. I suspect it might not be quite as comprehensive as 12 months ago, but I think it will be equally as successov.
Yeah, I'll come back onto that. But I have to admit, Ian, I was absolutely over the moon when the bookies were writing us off again. I think that's exactly where we want to be. But Gav, actually, just on that expectation levels, Gav, do you think that's going to be a factor within the fans next season? Like if we're, lower to mid-table or whatever, do you think, there's going to be conversations about where our expectations actually are?
It goes back to something I said before. We've been used to winning games. So as soon as you're not winning games, people are going to be like, well, I don't like that feeling. That's not nice.
Can't remember that.
Yeah. But I think the vast majority of people, if you sat them down now, not in the motion of a game or whatever, and said, you do understand that next season, it's not going to be easy. We're going to be playing a lot of games. Squad's going to be stretched. We're going to be traveling loads more. We're going to be trying to focus on the league at the same time as we're focusing on cup games. You do realize this is going to have a knock-on effect. We will probably not maintain the level that we did this year. If you sat them down and said it like that, they would go, yeah, I kind of get that. It's a price to pay for Europe. But in the moment, it's going to feel very, very different, isn't it? And to touch on something which Ian said, that's probably going to be more evident after the summer when we see how ambitious we are transfer-wise, because one way you do deal with that is by bringing in players and strengthening the squad and ensuring you've got enough players to deal with the ferocity of the amount of games that you're playing. If you do that, then we may well have another top 10 finish next season, which I think would be acceptable. It's just about ensuring that everybody's on board with what's going on. Look, we've snuck into Europe on the last day, but it wasn't by luck. We have a bloody good season to finish 7th in the Premier League. Nobody's blind to that, but a lot of the reasons that we ended up in that position were to do, I think, with being a newly promoted team and having that momentum and everything feeling new and fresh. And yeah, when you've been to Brighton away 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 seasons, it's not got quite the same allure. Or when, teams like Brentford, Bournemouth, God knows who else, Tottenham come to the Stadium of Light, the games have a bit of a different feel after 2, 3, 4 years. And it's just that adjustment in mentality that we're going to have to see, mainly in the fan base, I think. I don't think players suffer with that issue so much. I think it's mainly to do with fans and expectations. But if we can do that, then I can't see why anybody wouldn't be able to deal with a little bit more strife if it meant that we had better cup runs.
Yeah, we're talking about adjustments actually, Ian, because there's all the talk about second season syndrome, which a lot of people have talked about for years and years. But in terms of the team evolving, because we've seen sides like, and I'm going off the top of my head, teams like Stoke in the past, Charlton, Bolton. Maybe these clubs that thought, right, well, we've done this for a few years, we've played this way, we need to evolve and play better football and all this. And it was interesting that Regis LeBus said that he said recently, actually, he said that he didn't have the right luggage maybe this season to play a certain way. So he's played this way, being solid defensively so we wouldn't go 2 or 3 goals down early on. And Enzo Lefebvre hinted as well that they started planning for next year as soon as we reach 40 points. Do you see the style of play, maybe the team evolving a bit in that way?
I was very interested when Andrew Smithson said on a recent podcast about the team actually evolving, and he'd actually noticed it in matches. Now, let's take the last goal of the season Sunderland scored. Brian Brobby holds the ball up. Now, he then depends on teammates running beyond him. Now, that's happened. Not just that, but his pass, I can't remember who the players were, forgive my ignorance, but he passed to someone, and then someone underlapped inside him before crossing.
That
Where
was Hertrauder and Hume.
That's
Hume
right,
had
that's right.
Hertrauder, and then Lafayette underlapped him, didn't he?
Yeah, before Bobby made a right hash of trying to score himself. But I did find that goal quite interesting, and the ones at Everton, two of the goals at Everton as well, because I don't think they would have happened earlier in the season. Sunderland made themselves initially a tough nut to crack, fiercely hardworking, and I know that it's been pointed out that Sunderland haven't been particularly impressive at set pieces. But I do think that in open play, that they have matured into a better side in April, May than they were when they were getting arguably better results earlier in the season.
Yeah. And just on that point as well, Ian, the fact that, the potential that we might do that, do you think qualifying for the Europa League might influence maybe a slightly different type of player, or maybe, that we might get targets that we might not have if we hadn't have qualified for Europe? And, and do you think actually it's going to impact how many players we bring in as well?
The second half of your question is easier to answer than the first. Yes, it will probably mean a couple more players come. It will probably mean a couple of more players stay. I did wonder if Dennis Serkin would sign another 12-month contract because he would have been getting more games. Disappointing that he hasn't, and all the best to Dennis in his future career. I think what Sunderland are looking for now is they bearing in mind they will probably want to keep Roby, and although he is not a natural goal scorer, his pros massively outweigh his cons. But what they'll need is players, as we've just been talking about, running on beyond him and finding the back of the net. So I think Sunderland will be looking for whether they're inside forwards, whether you call them wide men, players who can add to the goal tally. A player, I know, everyone's saying who do you think would be great for Sunderland? I think is it Sunderland, West Ham would be a decent player. And so I think Sunderland will want to score more goals than they've scored this season, and concede as few, because it's been they've been very effective defensively. Again, the word from the boardroom is that it is quality ahead of quantity they're going for. Although I suspect European qualification might mean that they'll bring in a couple of young gambles, as it were, players who they could possibly develop, throw into League Cup games for argument's sake. And but I think primarily they will be looking to improve their team rather than strengthen their squad.
Yeah, but it's certainly going to be an interesting summer ahead, and we'll have it all covered on How We're the Podcast. We'll be jumping on doing emergency pods like we did last summer, Gav, when we get a sniff of someone signing or a rumour.
Aye, definitely, yes. We'll react to whatever happens. I know we've briefly touched on the World Cup, but I think we're going to maybe drop bonus episodes around World Cup games as well, particularly if they feature Sunderland players. So there's going to be plenty to react to and chat about. I think even now, to be honest, Chris, if we didn't have such a packed schedule recordings-wise, we might have even chucked a couple of news bits in, because there's already stories kicking off, isn't there, about who we might be signing, who might be leaving. We've mentioned Serkin going, and it's just gonna go on and go on and go on. And it's the start of June as we record this, so it's gonna get crazy, I'm sure. I mean, there's already clubs in the Premier League signing players, isn't there? I think today, for instance, I've seen Tottenham announce the signing of Andy Robertson, which wasn't a particularly well kept secret, but there's a player through the door somewhere else. I think Newcastle have signed a young goalkeeper, so it's already happening. So yeah, we'll be back whenever there's something to react to over the summer.
Yes, and it's going to be silly season soon because it is a World Cup summer, isn't it, Ian? Are you looking forward to it?
I look forward to all major sports events. Yes, I am. I'm actually on holiday for 2 weeks of it, so I might have to watch some of it on Greek TV, and my Greek's not very good. But yeah, I mean, I wish Ireland were there, but never mind.
Yeah. Now we get to the reason why you're on holiday for it. You're not bothered about it. Now we get to the bottom of it. Eh?
You booked that holiday, didn't you? And before
My wife booked it and doesn't even know there's a World Cup on.
Yeah, but we'll have a cover, Gav. We're doing maybe quick catch-ups on how the Sunderland players are getting on.
Yeah. Like I say, we'll be back whenever there's something to talk about. I mean, I think Ian touched on it before there, but Sunderland have got more players than most, I think, at this World Cup. So I think 11 in total. So there's some days where I think there's 4 games involving Sunderland players. I'm just looking at one here on our schedule. I think on the 20th.
4 games. Yeah, 4 games on one day.
Yeah, 20th of June. We've got Isidore, Alderete, Robbie Roofs, potentially Hertrauder if he gets a late call because he's part of the warm-up squad. Adingra. So there's one day where like every game features Sunderland players. So yes, I'm sure there'll be plenty for us to dig into with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good place to end today's pod. And just to say thank you very much once again, Ian. Thanks again for your time, and hopefully you'll join us throughout the summer, Ian. Yeah,
I'd love to. Quick shout out for a documentary coming up featuring a former Sunderland manager, Terry Butcher. Now, he was Rangers, I was Celtic. We were political opposites, and he had a pretty rough time at Sunderland, but I got on very well with him, and I've kept in touch. And it's quite an awe-inspiring watch in the same way that Jeff Brown's Roddy Gregoire story was.
Where can we find that then, Ian?
I think it's ITV4 on Sunday night.
Okay, good stuff. One to look out for. But thanks again, Ian. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
Cheers. And thanks again, Gav. Speak to you soon, mate.
Yes, thank you very much, mate.
Yeah, good stuff. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Of course, we'll have all of the latest on the Roker Report website, what's going on at Sunderland, every rumour. And I'm sure we're going to start a rumours article every week because that builds up throughout the summer. And then we've been linked with 100 players and we signed one of them. Is usually the way of that article. But of course, we'll have daily releases on How We're the Podcast. So look out for all of that. But from us, it's bye for now.
Hi, this is Ben Green from The Athletic FC. The podcast you're about to listen to is brought to you by Hotels.com. As a Hotels.com member, you save up to 20% on hundreds of thousands of hotels and earn rewards on every single stay, which means the trips you're taking now help pay for the ones you're already dreaming about. And unlike some other places, there are no blackout dates, so when you want to travel, your rewards are ready to go. So the next time you're planning a work trip or a getaway, make sure to book it at Hotels.com and start earning rewards. Hotels.com. It's all in the name.